Here I am then, carrying on with Mistral by Sash Games. This is the campaign game, which I've started in 1741. We've reached turn 9, the first turn of the summer quarter. The yellow ones there. This is the June-July turn. What's going on so far? Well, back in May, the British Admiral Haddock, who's currently blockading Cartagena here with some British ships, he sent a request to the Admiralty for some more frigates to help deal with Bourbon trade through the Mediterranean into the French ports of Marseille and Toulon. And the Admiralty kindly responded by sending him a pair of frigates, and he dispatched those off from Port Mahon to the Maltese roads down here, and we can see them now here blockading the Levant trade track. And then Captain Byng down here, Captain Byng there, soon to be Admiral Byng, I think, and in a few years' time he'll be shot. But that's a completely different story. Anyway, he returned from escorting the victualling convoy through to Port Mahon, so that successfully completed another order for, or the first order actually for the British side. So they've got one completed order down here, but that also freed up some cutters, some small auxiliary ships, cutters, brigs, sloops, well, probably not brigs, but cutters, corvettes maybe, for other duties. They came into the recovery box and then got made available, and so Haddock sent those off on sort of interdiction, convoy raiding duties as well. So we've now kind of taken care of this Levant trade track, albeit the Bourbon player is getting one free completed order, but that's not such a terrible thing. You know, we were looking at 3, and you know the situation at the start of the game, the British player was looking to roughly equalise the forces, not lose anything terrible, and just try and claw back into a reasonably stable position. And you know, it's 2-1 in terms of completed orders in the Bourbon favour, but the British are about to succeed in another one, and there's no way really to stop this flotilla. They've got 2 impulses to go before they've successfully blockaded Cartagena, and they can leave and do other things. So yeah, they're going to equalise 2-2. They're kind of 3-2 down in orders here, but you know, it's going okay. Realising that, the Bourbon player also realised that he needed some new orders for the summer, when the winds tend to be at their calmest and it's easiest to sail without gales and stuff. So they picked a couple of orders up. They wanted something for the French player, so they picked up a cruise Corsica and Sardinia for the French player to sail around, you know, sail around, have a bit of fun around the Mediterranean with his fleet, picking up prestige. And potentially there's a mechanism where if you can make a strategy roll in this game with your fleet commander, you can just keep an order running. So instead of having to go and do a different one, you can just say, we'd like that order again, please, that's useful. And if the fleet commander can make a strategy roll, which is, I'll have to show you one of these over here, but the middle blue number is their strategy rating. So the Spanish Admiral fleet overall Admiral has a 4, Pintado here has a 4, there's a guy here with a rather tasty 6. Thankfully he's not the opposing fleet commander. Haddock himself has a 3, so not brilliant but not bad either. Anyway, if he can roll 4 or less on a d10, so 50% chance, because 0's a counter 0. We could just repeat this order and try and rack up some more points, with the French fleet doing laps of Corsica and Sardinia. But we also have to take a random and accept a random order for the privilege of that. And we got this one, cruise the Adriatic. Now, that might seem simple, but it does mean sending ships all the way over here to essentially cruise up and down the coast from Venice down there. That is a long trip. That's a very long trip to be sending ships off over there. The Spanish, as the Spanish, I'm not sure we want ships that far away from the action. We haven't got that many, and we know the British have been bringing ships of the line, frigates and other things into the theatre, so we're not totally confident that we've got the numerical superiority that we had. So I think that may well get ignored, and the Spanish may have to just take a random order. Now, when they do that, they get to choose 3 and select 1. The British have to choose 2 and select 1, so the terms of those are slightly more favourable for the Bourbon player. So we may do that for the Spanish to see what their fleet's going to do, but at the moment everyone is actually in port. The British are in port specifically because it's the quarterly repair turn, and they didn't want to spend their precious victualized points. No, victualled. I keep calling it victualizing and victualized and stuff, but it's victualled. They don't want to spend their precious victualled points, which they've had to ship in from Britain, on repairs when they can have them quarterly in this turn. So they're waiting to see what repairs they can get done naturally in their ports. The Spanish are just idle, partly because their rolls, although they're getting 3 a turn, their repair rolls have been absolute garbage. In fact, we rolled an 8, 8 and a 9 for the Spanish the turn just gone, turn 8, and they didn't manage to repair anything at all in Cadiz, which is awful. So they're still trying to recover their ships in Cadiz, and so haven't really made plans to do anything else with them until they're at least in reasonable shape, but are in the meantime relying on racking up points with the French. So there we are. I'll come back when more is happening. So we're in the events phase of the summer quarterly turn 9 here in Mistral, and there are a couple of quite significant events that can happen at this point. There's the Flotter, and there's Trouble in the West Indies, and these take very similar forms, but one affects the Spanish and one affects the British, or I should say the Bourbon player and the British. So Trouble in the West Indies, if it occurs, the British player essentially has to take a squadron of 4 sail from the map and exit into the Atlantic within the following turn, or lose a point of prestige, and then they don't come back until the following spring with quite a lot of additional damage on them. So yeah, and that's basically it. And the die roll actually is interesting because it says in the book that the chance of occurrence is a die roll of 0 with no DRMs, but on the table up over there, I won't zoom in on it, but on the events flowchart it says a die roll of 3 or less. I contacted the designer Ian Weir about that discrepancy, and he gave me the following as a rule, essentially, or well as his guidance. He was essentially saying this was representing the War of Jenkins' Ear over in the Caribbean, and British sail being withdrawn to help reinforce that area, and that therefore the chances of this event should diminish as the years go on, and it should be 0 to 3 in 1940, 0 to 2, 0 to 1, and then from 43 onwards it can still happen. You can still have ships withdrawn to go and help out in the Caribbean from 1943 onwards, but a much lower chance. We're in 41, so it's happening on a 0, 1 or 2 on a D10. The flotter is a very similar concept, but probably slightly more punitive actually. On the Spanish player, they have to roll, and if they get a 0 or 1, then they have to do the same thing. They have to exit a squadron of 4 Spanish sail from the map. It comes back the following spring with a lot of extra damage on it, but the other thing it says is that Spanish formations at Cadiz may not be issued orders for the remainder of the current season and the following season. So it will lock down, if it happens, it will lock down the entire Spanish contingent of sail that's currently at Cadiz, because even if they form formations, they can't take orders. I suppose they could still sail, but not with orders. They could sail and attack things and, try and, for example, attack convoys, but they couldn't be carrying out orders. And then it says if there are no Spanish sail at Cadiz, so if you've vacated for Cadiz to avoid this penalty, then you have to send at least 1 squadron there, or you lose some prestige. So that's interesting. So that is the kind of way that the events book is bringing in external happenings, external events, external world affairs or wars in other parts of the world into these major powers, France, Spain, England. And you, as the regional sort of commander, are having to deal with that. Let's roll and see if either of them happen then. The French will roll a blue dice to, the Spanish actually, I haven't got a yellow dice, so I'll give the Spanish a white dice to see if the flotter happens. And they've rolled an 8, and it has not. The British will roll a red dice to see if they have to withdraw ships to the West Indies. And they get a 7, and they do not. So neither of these events are going to happen in the summer quarterly turn. When's the next time we check? The flotter, summer and fall turns, and trouble in the West Indies, spring and summer. Oh yeah, I rolled in the spring. So the flotter can come round again, but trouble in the West Indies isn't happening in 41. So I'm moving on then. We've just done event resolution, terminate orders, about to do some reinforcements and reorganisation. Mistral by Red Sash Games, coming into the autumn turns, turn 13, where we have a potentially interesting situation developing around Gibraltar and Cadiz. So throughout the summer months, each summer turn you roll for the activation of Corsairs. And on the first 3 summer months, we didn't get any Corsair activity. But on turn 12, we rolled, and this pirate activated in Salé, which is this port down here. So these range 4 galley Salé rovers came into play. And the prestige totals were equal at the time, which they go to the player with the lower prestige, but if they're equal, they go to the Bourbon player. So the Bourbon player was able to use these in the turn just gone, and the rules are that they can basically interdict sea zones or attack convoys, but actually galley auxiliaries can't attack convoys. If they interdict a sea zone and they're still there at the end of the turn, it counts as if there's the other side had failed an order. So the count as a failed order for your opponent. So of course the French waited until movement point impulse 4 in impulse 4, and then sent them out to interdict the gut sea zone at a point where the British couldn't do anything about that. However, the British could do something about that, because the British had just finished an order sailing across the coast of North Africa and back from Tunis to the Straits of Gibraltar, and had just arrived back with a small contingent of ships, but they had a light auxiliary with a range of 4, which they were able to use from Gibraltar to screen. And screening basically is like countering an activity. So it's a temporary countermeasure. So they didn't get rid of the pirates, but they did prevent themselves from failing an order because this pirate was here. So they sent that light auxiliary out. But now they've got the pirates still to deal with. So they did a couple of things, the British. The one thing they did, they rolled quite nice. They asked for some ships of the line as reinforcements, got quite a good roll, and then spent a point of prestige to bump the roll up. So they got 3 ships of the line as reinforcements. Immediately formed a detachment, put the recently returned Captain Cornwall in charge with a fleet auxiliary to help him out in case he needs to screen or do something, and sent them back out with show of force orders, which you can pick up when pirates come into play, to come down and perform a show of force against Saleh, and that will shut these pirates up for the rest of the year. You can also spend a movement point in the sea zone where they're in, and that sort of counts as sort of dissuasive tactics, I guess, hunting them down, making them feel less than welcome. So you just turn up in the sea zone where they're present, spend a movement point, and that sort of counts as sort of counter-pirate activity, and then they go away. But all they do is return to port if you do that, and then if they get rolled again, then they could come back out. However, I suppose the British, having spent the prestige point, are now lower than the French stroke Spanish Bourbon. So any future pirate activity would be controlled by them, which is another good reason for doing it. However, their immediate problem is that for the next 4 turns, this is counting as a failed order per turn unless they go and do something about it. And the Spanish are trying to bait them into doing that because they've created themselves a bit of a mugging crew out of Cadiz, which is waiting for the British to try and sail out here into the gut and try and give battle. So both sides with plans here, the British trying to get out and stop this from being a major problem for their shipping coming through the Gulf, the Straits of Gibraltar, and then perhaps getting a show of force order in against Saleh for a completed order. So they're hoping to exploit this, but the French, I keep saying French because it's got a blue circle around it, but it's not a French group. The Bourbon, French stroke Spanish, looking to exploit this situation and maybe get a battle on favourable terms out in this area. So that's what's happening. I've got to roll for Corsairs at the start of turn 9, so we will see what Corsair activity we've got. I've rolled a 0, which will be no Corsair activity this turn. So now we're checking winds and seeing what happens here over the next impulses. Okay, Mistral, turn 13. Where the rules create surprisingly sophisticated situations. I say surprisingly, create sophisticated and quite difficult, complex situations. And I'll try and explain something of what's going on here. I'm not sure I'll capture all the nuance, but the British formed up a formation to try and go and deal with this pirate, which the Spanish Bourbon player had just brought into play. And at the same time, the Bourbon player also formed up a fleet in Cadiz, some sort of formation in Cadiz, and starts sailing it out towards, well, this area. Now, we need to get through the Straits of Gibraltar as the British player. But that carries significant risks. If you're in the same space as an opposing formation and one or both of you are spotted, then a battle can occur. And you are automatically spotted in a straits, and this is the Straits of Gibraltar. So if we were to catch the wind, there's no wind blowing here, if we were to catch the wind up into the Straits of Gibraltar and this Bourbon formation were to use this prevailing wind line, which is blowing in the right direction for it, it could swing straight round into the Straits of Gibraltar. We'd both end up spotted, and if they wanted to, they could, either side could declare a battle. Now, we don't want a battle because we're a squadron of 3 ships of the line. We're just trying to get over here to deal with these pirates, but we don't know what this is. Other complexities in this situation is that when something tries to create a battle, the other side can withdraw if they've got the wind gauge. So if you can arrange it such that you have the wind gauge, you get to choose whether to fight or withdraw, and you also get to choose the intensity of the battle. In straits, the intensity of the battle always has to be at least medium, so it's either going to be medium or high. So another reason to not go into the straits is if we get caught in a battle there, it's going to be at least medium. And another reason not to go in is because this Bourbon formation would be coming in with the wind, and we'd be coming in against the wind, and that would give them the wind gauge. So all in all, this looks like a very, very dangerous thing to do if we assume that this, whatever's leaving Cadiz, intends us harm. But if we don't do this, how are we getting through the Straits of Gibraltar to deal with this pirate? The only way to do it in the fall would be if this grey Levanta wind were blowing. If that grey Levanta wind were blowing, then we could drop down here to the port of Melilla, wait till that Levanta is blowing, and then scoot into the Straits of Gibraltar. And even though we would then hit the same space as this formation, the fact that they were on stationary and we were coming in with the wind would give us the wind gauge. And then we could decline battle and head out through the Straits of Gibraltar and deal with this pirate. But it does rely on this grey wind blowing for us to get through. Once we're over here, let's say we got over here and dealt with this pirate, how are we getting back? If we tried to catch the wind, we'd likely lose the wind gauge. It's very close catching the wind compared to being on station, as in being stationary, but we're at a slight disadvantage with the wind gauge. Were we to come up down here to like Salé, and so the red wind can't blow in the fall, by the way, this Vendaval won't be blowing in the fall, so we can't rely on that, so we'd be having to rely on this, and we would have the enemy downwind from us. So potentially we could then use this prevailing wind to come through here. But were we to come to Salé and the enemy were to come up here, the problem there would be, while we'd have the wind gauge, we wouldn't have many options where to withdraw to. We'd have to withdraw back to here, at which point the enemy could probably just return to the Straits of Gibraltar and keep us locked out of getting back to Gibraltar. So we've got a really complicated picture here. Firstly, what are we guessing this is? Well, what we could do is sort of just back away, because if he comes through the Straits of Gibraltar, he'll be spotted, and then we'll be able to see whether he is indeed a formation or whether that's a dummy and they're just messing with us. But assuming it's some sort of formation, then we can aim to grab the wind gauge and try and at least outmaneuver them in terms of getting to this pirate. What happens after that is anybody's guess, and it would depend on what winds were blowing, and it would also depend on whether which side just wanted to rack up the attrition for being at sea, or wanted to commit those ships to doing nothing but a standoff out here while other things were happening. Super interesting situation, and I think the British have to come this way in the first instance, and see what happens. So I'll come back when I know more. So we have this standoff between the British and the Spanish. The British detachment is visible because it's in this Melilla area, which is a Spanish port, so they can see the ships. The Straits of Gibraltar showing a ground flotilla sitting there or in wait. So difficult stuff. The Levanter wind, the grey wind that we need to charge through, did not start blowing in this impulse. What did happen though was that the Barbary Corsairs in Tunis and Tripoli became active on a roll of 9, and the British player has control of those this turn and can assign them. So some pirate action may be coming the French way as payback for what's going on over here. So there's going to be some tit for tat kind of payback in the pirating stakes. But not much going on as the British seek to find a way to charge past the Grand Flotilla and get to those pirates, but they're waiting for the wind to change. Okay, the plot thickens again, and we're into the third impulse, and the Levanter has started blowing this grey wind with a force 10 gale off the coast of Cartagena, which is going to be moving down this way. That has a radius of 2. And that's causing a damage point at radius 2 spaces. 1 space is causing 2 damage points. In the same zone it's causing 3 damage points. Radius 2 is coming here and here or here and here. It only has to move a couple of spots and it's causing damage to the Straits of Gibraltar. Holy crap, this game's good. I mean, it's so good. The situations it creates, the complexities it creates. We've got a ground flotilla here trying to stop the British from interfering with pirate raiders in the gut. We've got a squadron trying to sneak past with gales heading their way from off the coast of Palma and Cartagena. We've got pirates raiding out of Tunis and Tripoli while the French are blockading Bastia. All being thrown up, all these situations just being thrown up organically. It's really, really interesting, fun, thrilling sort of game to play. Quite slow and thoughtful, but don't let it fool you. There's so much to think about, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm so impressed so far by what I've seen from this game. Just the way it creates these situations and gives you so much to think about, with not much in the way of, counter density, not great stacks, not great piles of stuff to worry about, but instead a really sophisticated movement, weather, and battle system. I mean, we haven't actually seen how the fighting works, but even just trying to engage is an exercise in patience and second guessing and understanding. So yeah, really incredible to be playing through it. Let's see what happens next. Well, actually, I know what happens next, because in this movement point impulse, this Grand Flotilla would be giving a no move order. This British detachment is going to head this way into here. We'd roll to see where the Gales went. No, they won't move in movement point impulse 1. And the French fleet up over Bastia has actually completed what it's doing and is back off to Toulon, I believe, unless they've got anything better to do now. I think they're back off to Toulon, so they are just rolling around out of Bastia into a small space up there. In here, the French are declaring a battle because there's 2 spotted sites in the same space. The British can ask what the Spanish have got there and find out that they've got 3 squadrons. The Spanish can ask what the British have got and find out they've got a squadron. The Spanish declare battle, but what then happens is we determine the weather gauge, and I'll show you the chances of the weather gauge here. You start with a 10 rating on the weather gauge and you apply all these modifiers, and if you've got the highest number at the end, you've got the weather gauge. So the Spanish have got a base 10 -5 because they're staying still, which I believe is what on station means, but from context it must mean that. So they've got 5. They haven't got a formation with a movement allowance of 5. They haven't got any squadrons with damage points over 2/3 of the damage rating. They haven't got a galley formation, and they've got their formation's leaders rating, and their leaders rating is a 3. So they've got a total of 8. But the British have got a 10, and they're approaching with the wind, so they've got an 8. And they've also got their formation's leader rating of 3, so they've got an 11. And so the British can withdraw from battle, but cannot withdraw using the direction that the enemy approached from. Well, the enemy stayed still, but so that won't stop them, but they'll just be able to move on in the next movement impulse. So I think the British are going to be able to sneak past this impulse, and we'll see what they can do once they have. Okay, at the end of impulse 3, these force 10 gales forced the Grand Flotilla of the Bourbons back into their Cadiz harbour. The British detachment down here in the gut has managed to dissuade these pirates from any further activity, and they've withdrawn back to their port in Salé, and the British ships are taking damage from this gale as we move into impulse 4. Yeah, what next? Well, the Bourbon fleet now faces an interesting choice. It was forced back into harbour in Cadiz here to avoid the force 10 gales. They've got you can't engage ships in sea zones, so they know they can't come out hunting this British detachment. They know what it is, they know it's a squadron of British ships, but they know they can't find it in the gut. And if it comes down here to Saleh, which it might do, but they'd still be approaching it from coming in the wrong direction, and it could essentially decline battle by having the wind gauge. So that's tricky. However, if it had orders to make a show of force against Saleh, they could at least prevent it from doing that by leaving Cadiz and coming and threatening it and forcing it to at least try and withdraw again. Interesting. But is that a good use of 3 squadrons which are starting to reach the point where they need repair? They're on 3 and 4 damage. If they enter the Straits of Gibraltar, they'll go up to 4 and 5. This is compounded by the fact that their own Levant trade convoys just turned up and may start coming under attack from British ships out of Port Mahon that may try coming down through the Balearic Sea or the Barbary coast and intercepting it. We don't know what route it's going to take, I haven't rolled that yet. And also there's the threat of these Barbary corsairs, which haven't been resolved yet, but are likely to cause trouble. So this being the most active or the main Spanish fleet, setting this trap was interesting, but it hasn't worked. And we're now thinking that we probably have to do other things with our ships than chase a British squadron around the Straits of Gibraltar. So yeah, I think they may withdraw for some repairs and then we'll reassess next turn.